Currently, as you all know, we are all living in a very stressful time. While solutions are being worked on to reduce the dire situation and challenges, it is important to ensure that we deal with it in a very meaningful manner with smarter ways to approach it. Right now, the entire world, as you know, is focusing on the social distancing. But it is not a time to alienate from one another. It is the time to rediscover healthy hobbies and activities like painting, photography, reading, writing, exercising. And of course, one thing we all should remember, we should do a lot of yoga to keep our mind agile. It is a time to do activities that will create a feeling of productivity. Productivity is very important. Believe me, it is a good antidote both for loneliness and boredom. It is a good time to safely connect with a lot of your family and friends. It is a time to restart the traditional way of conversation, which is by calling people, by talking to people. And that's exactly what we are trying to do at the Shiv Nadar Foundation. We have started this Shiv Nadar Foundation conversation series just to remain connected and also to make sure that everybody remains motivated and inspired by hearing truly inspiring leaders who have brought about extraordinary changes even in the most challenging situations. Let me introduce you to Fred Swaniker, who is deeply passionate about Africa and whose entire focus is to enable lasting peace and prosperity in Africa by developing future leaders. Fred seeks to educate and inspire the youth of Africa, who make 60% of the continent's population. I don't think anybody would be knowing that. Now let me tell you some interesting facts about Fred. Fred was selected as one of the 115 to have met President Obama in the first ever President Forum for Young African Leaders held in the White House. This is way back in 2010. He has also been recognized as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum, and he has been listed by Times as the top 100 most influential people in in the world in 2019. And so you can imagine how lucky I feel that I'm interviewing him. He started his professional career as a consultant in McKinsey. He's done his MBA in Stanford Business School. So here we are. We are very lucky to have this conversation with the true hero from Africa. Hi, Fred.
Hello, Pamela. It's great to be here.
Good to be connected with you. Welcome to the Shiv Nadar Foundation series. It's a pleasure seeing you. I'm truly inspired. I'm truly honored to be in conversation with you.
Thank you very much, Pamela. It's great to see you again.
Should we begin?
Yes.
I'm sure the viewers are waiting to hear you. So let's start. Africa as a continent, people know very little about it. Let's start by talking about your early childhood. It'll be interesting to understand how the little boy Freddie became Fred Swaniker of today. And if you can tell us a little about the hardship you faced running around from one war-ravaged country to another, and what were the lessons you learned from that?
Sure. So I think maybe just for context, Africa's population today is about 1.2 billion, which I think makes it almost the same size as India. And it has 54 countries. And I was born in Ghana, in West Africa. But over the course of the rest of my life, I managed to move to several countries. I left Ghana when I was 4. Mm-hmm. And then I went to another country called Gambia. And mm-hmm. then I went to Botswana. And then I went to Zimbabwe. One of the things that caused my family to move from to all these countries was the fact that there was a lot of political instability in those days. So there were, about at that time about 35 of the 50 countries in Africa at the time were in some form of conflict. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of civil war and coup d'états, and so my family moved to try and find more safer places to live, one of the things as well that I remember from that time growing up was just seeing a lot of poverty and mm-hmm. seeing a lot of people who were far less fortunate than I was. They didn't have access to clean drinking water. They didn't have access to, adequate food, and there was a lot of. They didn't have good health care, and you know, I was one of the things that I remember really striking me at that time was just how fortunate I was that even though I didn't grow up in a wealthy family by any means, I at least had 3 meals a day, and I had access to education, and and I had a roof over my head. And so I always used to wonder, why me? Why am I able to have these opportunities, and all these people don't have such opportunities? So it really made me realize that one day I need to create opportunities for other people.
Absolutely.
And I realized how lucky I was to be safe and healthy when so many other people were having were really struggling. And I also remember growing up, just recognizing the importance of leadership. I remember, when we moved to Gambia, and there was another military coup there, and we had to leave our house and walk through the bush throughout the night to try and get to another safe house. And I remember for a week we had to sleep on the floor because there were bullets flying through the window. If you stood up, it was dangerous. And I remember, one time my parents, even though they told us to stay away from the window, I was a naughty little boy, so I went to the window to see what was going on.
How old were you?
I was 5.
Oh my!
And I remember seeing, a gunfight with 2 soldiers in the trees fighting against each other. And I remember thinking, wow, this is not what should be happening. And what's going on? Why are leaders not making this happen? I remember also being stopped in the car by policemen, and they'd be asking for bribes. And I was thinking, police are supposed to be protecting us in society. Why are they, trying to extort us? So these are things that were seared in my brain as an early age. And then when we moved to another country, Botswana, everything was different. There, things worked. The police didn't ask you for a bribe. They had fiber optic technology in the 80s. And you didn't have. Everything was real. And I noticed that the leaders there were acting very, very differently from the leaders where I had come from. And finally, I remember at the time as well in Botswana, we didn't have our own national television station, so we had to watch the broadcast from South Africa. And those were the times of apartheid, and Nelson Mandela was in jail, and he had been in jail for 27 years, and they kept asking him, to give up the freedom struggle if he would come, and then they would let him be free. And he insisted that he would not come out of jail until his people were free. And I remember watching just how one person could make a difference to transform an entire country, and how he managed to liberate South Africa from apartheid. So that made me think that, if Africa could develop, it made me realize the importance that just one individual could have in society.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so then that's just how, Africa would be so much better if we could develop more leaders like Nelson Mandela. And so many of those childhood experiences really what has shaped the work that I'm doing today to develop 3 million leaders for Africa in the next 15 years.
So let's move to another very significant part of your life chapter, your journey at Stanford. How did you reach from Africa to Stanford, and what was your life like at that prestigious business school? And my last question in this is, how did you see yourself changing, or how did you see your future course getting defined at Stanford?
Certainly. After I finished my high school in Zimbabwe, I had a chance to do my first degree, my undergraduate degree in the United States. And so Stanford was really my second time back in the US. But I think the first time that I went to the US also had a very interesting resonance for me, because my parents said that they couldn't afford to pay school fees for me to go to the US. So I had to write. In those days, there was no internet. So I wrote to about 200 schools asking for a scholarship in the US. And you would wait for 6 weeks, and then they would send you an envelope, and then you'd read it, and they say, sorry, there's no scholarships available for international students. And I kept doing this over and over again. Eventually, I found that there were 50 schools, 50 universities that were willing to give scholarships to international students. And I applied to some of those, and I got admitted and I got a scholarship. But I remember thinking that there were so many people in my class who were as talented as I was, but they just didn't have a chance to figure out the system. So that moment was something where I said, one day I'm going to set up a school that's going to make it possible for young people who are talented to be able to get access to top education. So then I go to the US and I joined McKinsey in South Africa after that for a couple of years. And then McKinsey then sponsored me to go to Stanford to do my MBA on one condition, that I was supposed to come back and work for them.
Okay.
For 2 years. So while I was at Stanford, it was a great experience. I remember being blown away by, just the spirit of innovation and entrepreneurship that was there. There's Yahoo and there's Google and Cisco and all these companies, and every person on campus was thinking about the next startup. So it was very, inspiring to be in that kind of environment. And it got me thinking about my experiences of living in different parts of Africa and what I could do as well. And this issue of leadership was always in the back of my mind. And so, I spent the time at Stanford actually writing the business plan for the African Leadership Academy. As a school that would select young people from across Africa to become the next generation of leaders. I also was able to really recognize the importance of networks and met some very inspiring people. And one of the other things that I realized about my time at Stanford was, when I had gone there, I thought maybe there's something special about the water in Silicon Valley or the air in Silicon Valley that makes all these, Mark Zuckerberg come out of there, and founders of Yahoo and Google and everything like that. So I thought, let me go and see. But one thing I noticed when I was there is that there's nothing different about the air or the water in Silicon Valley. It tastes just the same as in Africa. The only difference is that they take a 16-year-old kid with an idea seriously. And the next thing, that becomes Apple, it becomes Google, it becomes Yahoo. And so I realized that, in Africa, we have the same talented young people who have brilliant ideas. The only difference is that no one is taking them as seriously as they do in Silicon Valley. And so that inspired me to say, I want to go and find these young Africans who have the same brilliant ideas, to innovators, entrepreneurs who could change Africa, who could change the world, but give them an opportunity to do so, because that's really the difference between Silicon Valley and everyone else.
So Fred, when you say that, I think I've known you long enough to know about the African Leadership Academy and the university, but I'm sure that all our viewers would like to know more about what is African Leadership Academy, what is the university, what is the vision, what is the motivation, and how has it grown over the years?
Certainly. So, the first thing I'll talk about is really just sort of the decision to start the academy itself. So I wrote the business plan when I was at Stanford. As I said, the idea was to build a school that would select the most outstanding young people in Africa that we thought had the potential to really be transformative, to change Africa. So, to find, the next Nelson Mandela, or, the African Bill Gates, or the African Shiv Nadar, to really find outstanding young people that could transform Africa. That was the vision. The idea was that it would be a 2-year boarding school program that would bring people from all across Africa, most of them on full scholarships from disadvantaged backgrounds, but who will all have this passion, and to train them, and then to help them get to top universities around the world. A few things I think stand out about this school. Firstly, it's not just about, the academy is not an institution that aims to solve the problem of education.
Correct.
The problem we set out to solve is the problem of leadership, and we're using education as a means to that end. So it's a school with a purpose. We have schools that train doctors, you have schools that train engineers. So we thought, if we want to get leaders, let's create a school for leaders so that we can prepare people for leadership from an early age. So the curriculum is very different. We have a focus on learning by doing, and a lot of research that shows that to acquire any skill, only 10% of it can be learned in the classroom. 20% is learned from your peers and your mentors, and 70% comes from doing. You learn best by doing. So we do a lot. Right. So the school you learn how to be a leader by being a leader, and how to be an entrepreneur by being an entrepreneur. So on campus, the students have to start ventures. We have a venture capital fund. We invest in them. They start businesses, and they really learn how to lead at a very early age. It's also about really instilling in them a sense of purpose and passion for Africa, and a sense of service, so that they can, help to solve our continent's problems. And one thing about it is we really set the standards very, very high, because one of the things I believe is that if you are on a racetrack and you are behind the car that is winning, you cannot go at the same speed if you want to catch up. You need to go much faster. So we set the standards very, very high for all the people who go to this academy, to say that, you can't say that this is good enough for Africa. No, you need to be, one of the best in the world, and to really have those high standards so that you can come up with brilliant ideas and innovation that can really transform the continent. So that's the vision of the school. And it's been going on for 12 years now. And we've produced about 1,200 leaders. And it's gotten quite a bit of recognition throughout the world. I mean, one thing that was quite exciting is that recently Bill Gates decided to send his daughter to our school.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah. So
and what exactly is she doing there?
She was there for a term. She's gone back to the States. She wanted to learn because to be. So that's really, just to sort of talk about the standard of the school. It's really producing world-class talent that someone like Bill Gates want to send his daughter there.
And Fred, while you're talking about the Leadership Academy, a little more about the university you've set up, which is so unique that I don't think a model like that exists right now. So could you just elaborate a little on the university too?
Yeah, so after several years of running the academy and seeing many of our graduates leaving the academy to go and study in the US, about 80% of them would leave Africa to go to the US on scholarships. They would go to Harvard and Stanford and Yale and MIT, etc. So it was very exciting to see that happen. But three things were troubling me. One is the fact that 80% of our graduates had to leave Africa to go to university. So I said, that as an African leader, that didn't quite sit well with me. I said, we need our own African Stanford and Harvard so that these graduates from the academy don't have to leave the continent. The second thing I was also bothered about was that, we would have thousands of applicants every year, and we could only take 3% of them. And so there were so many, we could see the hunger for what we're doing. So we said, we need to do this at a larger scale than what we're doing. And then the third thing that was troubling me was that when when the students came to the academy, we trained them in a very innovative way. We got them thinking like disruptive innovators and entrepreneurs. And then they would go to the university, and the university would be very traditional. And it was all about just studying and books and grades, and not really about creating problem solvers and leaders with a purpose, to change the world. So that's what inspired me and my other colleagues to think about building something that was much larger scale than the university, than the academy, and also something that would be, would allow us to keep the talent that we're developing in Africa. Around the same time as well, I came and I visited you in India, and I saw what you were doing with the Shiv Nadar schools and the Shiv Nadar universities. And then I went to China, and I also visited there, and I saw what they were doing. And I said, we're thinking too small in Africa. We need to think bigger. So originally, the goal we had was to develop 6,000 leaders. And so I said, when we build these universities, I want to train 3 million leaders.
Oh, absolutely fabulous.
Let's scale up and build network universities around the continent, and really create the university of the future in a disruptive way. So a couple of things that are different about African Leadership University. One is, most universities, when you go there, they give you a menu of academic disciplines, like a Bachelor of Arts in History, Bachelor of Science in Chemistry, Engineering, and so forth. Whereas, a lot of studies show that about 90% of people enter jobs that have nothing to do with what they studied in college.
Correct.
And the world is changing so fast that that's going to become even smaller percentage. So then we thought, well, if what you're studying has almost nothing to do with what you're going to do in work, and also we don't know what the jobs of the future look like.
Correct.
Then why are we giving people a menu of academic disciplines that we have decided? And so one of the things we're doing differently in this university is we don't give our students a menu of academic disciplines. We rather give them a menu of the biggest challenges facing Africa. So we have a list of the big problems that need to be solved, like healthcare, climate change, governance, youth unemployment, infrastructure, etc. And then we ask our students not to choose an academic major, but to declare a mission. Decide which one of these big problems you want to solve, and then curate your own learning experience around these problems that you want to solve. So the end goal is not to teach people facts and figures, but rather to create problem solvers who have learned how to learn. And this way of thinking, we think, is also much more relevant in a world where artificial intelligence and automation is making many jobs obsolete. What we need to do is create problem solvers and innovators who can keep learning new things as the world changes.
Absolutely.
So another thing that we're doing in this university is driving the learning not from the professor but by the student. Because
Interesting.
things we realize that if we are going to develop a university that is based on professors, we don't have enough professors in Africa. And so we'll be waiting for 100 years before we can train all those professors before we can train the students.
Correct.
And education in the past was about we lived in a world where information was scarce. So you had to go to the university to get it from the professor or from the library book. But today we live in a world where information is ubiquitous, thanks to so many technology companies like yourselves and Google, etc. So that allows you to do different things. It allows you to really shift the learning responsibility from the professor to the student, and the student can learn by themselves using access to all the content that's now available. They can learn from each other as peers, and then they can also, from time to time, learn from some facilitator. So that's really some of the things that are different about this university. It's a student-driven university that where the people are not graded on exams, but on problems that they're solving, and where they get to choose a mission and not a major. And the end goal is to create leaders who will transform the company and transform the world.
Very interesting work you've been doing. And let me ask you another question. So, in the next decade, we are expecting that one of the largest workforce will be from Africa. And it will not be wrong to say that Africa will become the new China or the new India. What, according to you, is needed to fully leverage the great underlying potential of resources which is there in that continent?
Yeah, so Africa is going to be 40% of the world's population by the end of the century. And we are going to have a workforce larger than India's, larger than China's by
Correct.
2035. So that is either going to be a big crisis or it's a great opportunity. One of the things that's very exciting for me is that if we do the right things now, we can convert it from a crisis to an opportunity. And that's why we are on a mission to unlock this human capital that we have on the continent. Because you see, the rest of the world is aging. The average age in Italy or Japan is 47. The average age in Africa is 19.
Oh, wow.
So we are the stock of the world's young talent.
Absolutely.
And if we can educate them and develop their passions and skills, then we can really create an engine for innovation and entrepreneurship for the whole world, not just for Africa. So I think the real opportunity is to really realize that there are there's a tremendous store of young, talented people in Africa. And if we just give them opportunity, then it can really create a lot of innovation. Because one of the things I believe is that constraints drives innovation. And in Africa, we have a lot of constraints. We don't have a lot of time to solve our problems. We don't have a lot of money. We don't have a lot of educated people. So we have to reimagine everything and rethink. And so that's going to force us. So many of the world's problems that we are trying to solve in climate change and food security and the empowerment of women and education and infrastructure actually will be solved in Africa, because we have no choice but to innovate and
Correct.
to imagine and not to just copy models from the rest of the world. And so that's and if you think about it, many of the world's greatest innovators have come from Africa. Elon Musk is a South African.
Absolutely.
And he's built Tesla. That today every person in the world can get a heart transplant, because the first heart transplant was done by a doctor in South Africa, about 40 years ago. Or, one of the pioneers of fiber optic technology was a Ghanaian professor working in the US. So these are many talented people that have emerged from Africa despite education investment. So imagine what can come out if we deliberately invest in the youth of Africa. We can really unleash a lot of innovation, not just for Africa, but for the world.
Now that you've talked about leadership, you've talked about innovation, I would want to know, what is your idea of, I mean, you talked of so many people. Who are the people in the walk of life, where you're working, what you're doing, who are the people who have inspired you, who have been a true inspiration to you?
Certainly. I mean, so I've been inspired by many people. One of the people that inspired me the most from an early age was my mother.
Mm-hmm.
She started a school in Botswana. And when I was, my father died when I was about 16, and she was, approached by their different parents in the town to ask her to start the school. And she said initially, I can't start the school. I've got 4 children to look after. I have a full-time job I need to keep. But they kept insisting. So she started a small study group with 5 children. And, she had 2 teachers. And next thing it grew to about 25 children. And then by the time I was 18, she made me the headmaster of the school. And so for about a year, I ran the school and dealt with the parents and teachers, and that was my first experience as an innovator, as an entrepreneur in education. And she coached me and mentored me, and to this day, even as I went on to start the academy and the university, she always calls me and says, you're doing this wrong. You need to do this better. So my mother's is an inspiration for me, and she's a good coach for me. I've also been inspired by someone like Graça Machel. She's the widow of Nelson Mandela, and she's the chancellor of our university. And what I really like about her is that even though she was the youngest minister of education in Mozambique, and she's with the elders, and she's on the UN commission and so forth, she's very authentic. And is one of those leaders who the more you get to know, the more you really get to see that they are really, very genuine and have good values and so forth. I'm also inspired by many, leaders in the tech sector. So, I like the way Jeff Bezos thinks. His long-term thinking and the continuous experimentation and innovation that he drives at Amazon. I'm also inspired by Elon Musk. He's a bit crazy in some regards, but he thinks in a very big and unusual way, which is what I think is we need in the world. I also think Shiv Nadar is very inspiring in terms of what he's done in India with HCL. So these are some of the leaders that have inspired. But more recently, looking at, for example, what's happening with the coronavirus, I've noticed that, and there was an article in Forbes recently that many of the leaders who are the countries that are leading the coronavirus response have been led by women. So if you think
Correct.
about, Germany,
Absolutely.
Taiwan, New Zealand,
Correct.
we're seeing a really inspiring crop of women leaders at the helm of their countries. And I think that there's a lot that the world can learn from women in leadership. And I'm really inspired by how they are leading their countries to see much better results than we're seeing, for example, from the United States. so that's another. These are some inspirations that I'm drawing at this moment.
So before I ask you any more questions, there are lots of questions from the viewers. They must be getting frustrated that why am I not asking you? So let me just start with a couple of them. We have a question saying, I'm going to mix 2 questions together. What does leadership mean to Fred? And the second question is there a formula to create leaders, or what are the steps we go along in attempt to make them?
Certainly. So what is leadership for me is really about being an agent of positive change. So I believe that leaders are people who use their unique talents and their skills and their networks to serve others and to drive positive change in society and in any way. And this can be, I'm not just talking about political leaders. It can be leaders in business, leaders in science, leaders in technology, leaders in all fields, in sports. But what are you doing to really effect positive change in society? How are you affecting the lives of others and not just yourself?
Absolutely.
That for me is what leadership is. And I believe that anyone can be a leader. It's not, you don't lead just simply because you have a title. It's really about the impact that you have on society and on others. Do I believe that? How do you create leaders? Over the years, this is a question that has been studied, and people say, are leaders born or are leaders made? One of the things I believe is that everyone has the potential to be a leader. And so we have, over the years, come up with a formula for how we believe that leaders are created. And the formula is very simple. It's three things that we believe need to come together for a leader to emerge. One of the things we believe is that leadership cannot be taught. However, leadership can be learned. And the difference means that the difference between those two is that it's really talking about the notion of self-agency. You can take a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink.
Correct. Yeah.
So what we do is we create an environment that increases the likelihood of leaders emerging, but the leaders themselves have to step up. So what are the things that go into that environment? There's three things. The first is you need to select people with leadership potential. So it's about finding people who have 5 traits. One is courage, because to be a leader, you have to change the status quo and you have to be, have the courage to really fight some difficult battles. The second is passion. What drives you? What's that fire in that belly that really keeps you going through all the ups and downs?
Yeah.
The third is resilience. When you're knocked down, you wake up, you keep going, you keep fighting, and you don't give up, right? Number 4, we look for values. Can you tell right from wrong? Integrity, humility, etc. And then finally, we look for imagination. Can you think about, a better way of doing things? Imagine a better world. So that's the first part. Is really finding those traits in people. The second part then is practice. We believe that you learn leadership by leading. It's not a theoretical subject. So you have to give people a chance to really lead in small projects. So one of the things we do on the campus in the academy and the university is from the get-go, these young people are put in situations where they have to run companies. They have to, it could be a very small scale, but they're practicing what it means to be a CEO or what it means to be a CFO at the age of 18 or 19. And you're learning how to run, to manage a budget and these kinds of things. And they're going to the World Economic Forum and speaking on panels with world leaders and practicing and seeing themselves as leaders on a small scale. Then the third thing you need is networks. Because no matter how good your skills are as a leader, if you don't have access to the right networks, someone who can invest in you, who can mentor you, who can open for your first customer, you won't be able to scale yourself. So that's really our formula. Potential plus practice plus networks. If you bring those 3 things together, then you increase the likelihood of leaders emerging.
So let me ask you another question by a viewer. Now that you're talking of leadership, African Leadership Academy, how do you fund the academy and how are you working towards making it self-sustainable?
That's an excellent question. The academy itself is a non-profit entity, and we raise donations from different people around the world. My Stanford network has been very helpful. So many Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, many of the world's top entrepreneurs have been funding us over the last 15 years. So we raised about $150 million to fund it, and we get scholarships, and we're building an endowment for it as well right now. So that's a non-profit, but it's a small scale, and so it can operate as a non-profit. However, when we started building the university, we realized that we can't build a university that is only dependent on donations because of the scale of what we're trying to do. The academy, our budget is only about $10 million a year. For the university, our budget will be about $1 billion a year, right? For the system that we're building, $1 billion or $2 billion when we get to scale. So we realized that we cannot fund it from donations. So what we have created is a system where we are providing the education to the young talents that are coming through the academy, where they don't pay upfront because most people in Africa can't afford to pay for the education.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But they sign what's called an income share agreement with us, where they agree to pay 10% of their income for 5 years when they get a job.
Okay.
And so one generation of students then pays for the next generation. So when they get a job and they're employed, then they are paying it back to fund the next generation. And so that's one of the ways in which we are sustaining it. We also are creating a talent agency, because we have many of the world's companies coming to hire our talents. Google is coming to us, Facebook is coming to us, McKinsey, and they want to hire our talents. So we are creating a talent agency that we call The Room, where our graduates, after they graduate, they join this talent agency. So just like in Hollywood, they have these talent agencies that manage the careers of the celebrities and get them their acting gig and then their movie, then they get them onto the Trevor Noah show, and then they get them an endorsement with the brand. We are building a talent agency where the talents that we produce, we will help them get their first internship and then their first job and then their venture capital and then board appointment, and then they'll pay us a small subscription fee for getting that access. And then all the employers who want to come and access the talent will also pay to access that. So almost like a private LinkedIn for the top talent. And then we can get income from that, which can then fund our training. So we basically are building these mechanisms to ensure that we have a sustainable business model, and then we can earn our own income to fund the social mission that we have, which is to 3 million leaders in the next 15 years.
And when these people start working in the first 5 years, when you're talking of the first 5 years, does it have to be in Africa or it could be any part of the globe?
So we are hoping that most of the leaders, about 70-80% of them, will stay in Africa and will work on the ground, because we need to obviously have leaders who are solving our problems on the continent. However, one of the things that I'm very excited about seeing with some of the changes that, because with every crisis comes an opportunity.
Correct.
So right now, the world is in this crisis with the coronavirus. But one great opportunity that is coming out of it is that many companies are now seeing that you can actually do remote work. And so before, if we were looking at placing our talent only in African companies, now we can actually place them with global companies, but they don't need to leave Africa.
Correct.
And deal with all the problems of immigration and xenophobia, etc. They can work remotely. So one of the things we're really looking forward to seeing now, and that's what we hope this platform, the Room, will do, it will, to attract employers all around the world to hire the talent that we're producing, but hire them remotely. So we can place an engineer from Nigeria working with Siemens in Germany, but they don't need to leave Africa. Or we can have a fashion designer sitting in Nigeria,
correct,
working with Zara in
yeah, the working dynamism is completely changing now.
Yeah. So hopefully we can get some of our graduates working with HCL, but they can work from there.
Absolutely, we are looking forward to that. Okay, so one more question from a viewer. One of the biggest challenges with these model is how to scale, which you've already told us. Your vision is to build 25 universities across Africa in 30 years. Would you like to share with our budding social entrepreneurs how to scale up this venture for the benefit of society at large?
Certainly. So, one of the things that when we started originally, we said we were going to build, like you said, 25 universities. We've actually are thinking that we need to do more than, it's probably now going to be more like 100 to 200 sites around Africa. The reason being is that originally the first version of the university was a residential campus. So everyone had to fly to a center place and live in housing and everything. And that's very expensive because most of the air ticket, the housing and everything. So what we realized that instead of concentrating them in these 25 centers, we probably need more like 100 to 200 centers that are much closer to people. And then they can stay at home. They don't have to fly anywhere. They can be fed at home, etc. So that drives down the cost and makes it more accessible. But probably the most important thing about this model is we have built it around an abundant resource, not a scarce resource.
Correct.
Because if we were designing it around the scarce resource of professors, then you can only scale at the rate at which you can find professors.
Absolutely.
But because we have designed the learning model around students, then we have an abundant resource, right? And so because they teach themselves using technology and they teach each other through peer-to-peer learning model, we are able to then scale very quickly because we've removed the key bottleneck to scale. And then the final thing, of course, that is really critical to scale is finding ways in which we can take our culture as we go from one side to another. And because when scaling, that's the most critical thing to get right, is to really take your culture into one side. And so one of the ways we are doing that is by hiring our own graduates.
Correct.
And some of the facilitators and the administrators who are leading these sites, so that they can take the culture and the vision with them to these sites and allow us to scale and to be radically empowered, so that they can really make decisions at the front lines without coming to the center. So these are some of the things that, and of course, technology really helps to scale as well.
Absolutely.
Right? Which of course you would all know at HCL, but really thinking about how do we leverage technology to allow us to scale and be innovative.
So Fred, tell us another thing. They say that crises give birth to a lot of opportunities, and at this current moment, we know that we are under a pandemic and it's going to last for a while. We see a lot of social entrepreneurs emerging. What is that one message as a social entrepreneur yourself you see which you can give to the young youth who want to become entrepreneurs, who can learn from you, from the mistakes and the do's and don'ts? That will be very interesting to share with the viewers.
Well, certainly. Firstly, I'd say that there's never been a better time or a greater need for entrepreneurs than now.
Correct.
Because at the end of the day, entrepreneurs are not driven by money. Absolutely. The best entrepreneurs are driven by design problems, right? And by cause, right? And that's what fuels their passion. So there are many, many challenges to be solved right now. So now is the time for you to step up as an entrepreneur. The world needs you. And these entrepreneurs, I always say, are people who solve big problems in creative ways with limited resources. And right now, those conditions are all there. Right? We have big problems, we have limited resources, and we need to be creative. So, whether it's commercial entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, we need entrepreneurs to step up and bring that creativity to bear. The other thing I'll say is, because there's likely to be a recession in the world. Some are saying in the next for 6 months, some are saying 3 years.
Correct.
The amount of jobs that exist are going to diminish.
Oh, absolutely.
Entrepreneurship is going to be the way to really create a living for yourself, and therefore, young people need to step up. Finally, I'll say that to be an entrepreneur, you really need to start first by finding a hard problem to solve. And the harder the problem, the better it is.
Absolutely.
And because that's when you're really going to be making a big difference. And also that's when you can build something that is really distinctive and can withstand competition, etc. Because you're really thinking about solving big problems for society. So I think it's a very exciting time to start a business or to start a social venture. And those businesses that are born in this era, if they can survive now, then they're going to be very, very successful, because this is one of the worst times to be starting. And if you can build something that's successful now, then you will definitely thrive when conditions improve.
Terrible time for humanity, for sure. I'm going to pick up another question from a viewer. So it's an interesting question. Is leadership more science or art? I mean, a good leader is one who shows scientific approaches or moral and artistic approaches.
I believe that you need to do a bit of both, right? There are some times when leadership is simply about being present and being empathetic and listening and engaging and comforting people and different things that require your emotional intelligence and for you to improvise and to think creatively, and there's no formula for how you can solve that problem, right? And that's really when it's more, I would say, the more artistic side of leadership. But there are also some proven techniques that will allow you to be a better leader. For example, leveraging data to make decisions. That's when now you start getting more towards the scientific side of leadership, where it's saying, before you decide, can you get some data? Can you, do some experimentation? Can you do some A/B tests and see what works better before you make a decision? There's also a lot of research and literature that has been and studies that have been done on different kinds of leadership and what works in this context versus that context. And I think you can study that, the different leadership models that you can bring to bear, and case studies that you can look at how other leaders have led. And that's when we start getting more and more towards the scientific aspect of leadership. So I would say that there are some things you can learn about leadership, but more importantly, you need to put them into practice. But very often, leadership is really a game of trial and error. You try things, you see what works, you reflect, you get feedback.
Failures are equally important.
Exactly.
You know what, Fred?
Failure is critical.
Talking to you, time flies, right? And there's always so much to learn. And one next question is from my side. I was reading in the Time 100 event where you spoke about doing hard things. Now, and especially you were talking of how it should be done by the privileged. Now, tell us something more about how does one stay motivated to do hard things, and what do you say is a hard thing?
So yeah, I mean, what I was saying when I gave that acceptance speech at the Time 100 gala last year was really that in a world where so many people are disadvantaged and are suffering and are really mired in poverty and so many challenges. Those of us who are fortunate enough to be alive,
Absolutely.
to be educated, to have a job, and to have and to have networks, are very privileged. Every single person on this call is very privileged because you are employed, you are healthy, you are educated. I mean, you are part of the 1% of 1% of society. So the point I was making is that the only way you can justify your privilege is by using these opportunities that you have had to serve others and to create opportunities for others. And so those of us who are privileged should not be solving small problems.
Absolutely.
The only way you can justify this privilege is by solving hard problems and really using these unique opportunities that we've had to create impact for the world. So that's so how do you motivate people to solve hard problems? I think it's really about getting people to recognize that the hardest problems to solve are also the most fulfilling. And it really gives you clarity about why you were put on earth. If you're doing something that's really meaningful and purposeful, then the going might be tough, but the end result is
phenomenal.
It's phenomenal. Yeah. It's the greatest feeling in the world.
Yeah. So, what is that one thing we can all learn from Africa?
Well, there are many things we can learn from Africa. I think that as I mentioned, the innovation and entrepreneurship that is coming out of Africa, because we have all these constraints and the fact that we are having to rethink everything and not just borrow models from the rest of the world. So the spirit of innovation and entrepreneurship that this generation, that this young generation of Africans is bringing, is something that the rest of the world can learn from. And I predict that many of the greatest innovations that will solve some of the world's big problems in this decade are going to come from Africa. So people from the rest of the world should really be coming to learn those innovations and taking it to the rest of the world. For example, what we are doing with education, last year when Fast Company came up with its 50 most innovative companies in the world, number 15 on that list was Alibaba, number 17 on that list was Apple, number 37 on that list, or 35 I think, was African Leadership University. We were the only university on that list, not Harvard or Cambridge or Oxford. It was an African university. So what we are doing in education, some other people will be doing in healthcare, some other people are doing in technology. There's a lot of innovation that's coming out of Africa. And I think the rest of the world can really start to learn some of that innovation and then take it to their own world, parts of the world.
Fred, we are running short on time. Conversations with you can go on and on, but we really wanted to thank you for taking out time. It means a lot to all of us. I'm sure the viewers have thoroughly enjoyed hearing you. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Be happy and be safe.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being in the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.